The castle lay shrouded in silence, its towers rising like blackened spears against the pale glow of the moon. Cold mist coiled through the arches and pillars, curling along the floor of the grand hall like restless spirits. The chandeliers burned faintly, their light more shadow than flame, as though even fire itself feared to shine too brightly in this place. And within that quiet hall stood a woman. Her gown clung to her as if spun from midnight itself, intricate silver threads glimmering faintly when she moved. Her head was bowed, her hands folded against her chest as though shielding something fragile within her heart. She looked small before the vastness of the chamber, yet there was a strength to her presence, something unspoken, something that drew eyes even when she did not raise her own. Behind her, a figure moved closer, silent as a wolf in the dark. He wore a cloak of thick fur, and his armor gleamed faintly beneath the shadows. His presence filled the room like a storm rolling over distant hills, unseen but deeply felt. His breath stirred against her hair as he leaned close, his voice low, quiet but edged with something fierce. "You do not belong here," he murmured. Her lips trembled before she spoke. "And yet here I stand." The words carried neither defiance nor surrender. They were simply truth. Her name was Ilara. Once, she had lived among sunlight and laughter, in a village where the fields bloomed with golden wheat and the sound of children's voices drifted through the air like birdsong. Her days had been simple, her dreams small but full. She had wanted only peace, only the warmth of belonging. But shadows had followed her since childhood. Ilara bore a mark across her skin, faint but unmistakable, like ink poured into her veins, curling into shapes that no healer could name. When she was small, people whispered it was nothing. A birthmark, perhaps, but as she grew, so too did the mark, darkening with each passing year. With it came strange moments, lamps that flickered when she neared, whispers in empty rooms, dreams that lingered as though half real. The village grew fearful. Fear, as it always does, turned to distance. Friends pulled away. Children stopped playing near her. Even her family looked at her with worried eyes. She learned to smile through loneliness. She learned to carry silence. She learned to walk as though shadows did not cling to her, but the mark was patient. It deepened, twining along her arm until it burned like embers against her skin. It was then the summons came. The castle was a place no villager dared speak of aloud. They called it cursed, a dwelling for things that belonged to night rather than day. Yet it loomed at the edge of their lands, watching, waiting. And one night, when the moon was blood-red, the riders came for her. They bore no weapons, only cloaks as dark as ravens' wings. They spoke no words, only handed her a sealed letter bearing the crest of the Shadow Lord himself. The message was clear. Her mark had been seen. Her presence was required. She could not refuse. And so Ilara crossed the boundary of her world, leaving behind fields of sunlight for walls of stone and silence. The man who stood behind her now, cloaked in fur and steel, was known to many names, the Warden of Night, the Keeper of the Cursed, but most called him simply the Shadow Lord. His true name was Kalen. To others, he was a figure carved of coldness, his eyes sharper than blades, his voice a command. But to Ilara, standing in the heavy hush of the grand hall, he felt different, not gentle, never gentle, yet not cruel either. There was something in his silence, something in the way he looked at her as though he knew the loneliness she carried. As though he too bore chains unseen. "Why call me here?" she whispered, her fingers brushing the mark on her arm. "Is this what you wanted? To claim me?" His eyes darkened, not with anger but with sorrow. "You are already claimed," he said softly. "Not by me, by the shadows themselves." Days passed, each heavy with silence. Ilara wandered the castle, her footsteps echoing through halls where tall windows showed only the endless night. Shadows seemed to stir wherever she walked, curling at her heels like restless wolves. At times she swore she heard them breathe, whispering words just beyond her understanding. Kalen watched her from a distance. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice carried a strange weight, as though every word was measured, as though he feared to say too much. It was he who explained the truth. The mark was not chance. It was a bond, ancient, powerful. Long ago the realm had made a pact with the shadows to protect their world from a greater darkness. But such bonds demanded vessels, mortals through whom the shadows might anchor themselves. Ilara was one such vessel. She had been chosen long before her birth. "You carry their strength," Kalen said one night, his eyes fixed on the fire that burned weakly between them, but also their hunger. If you do not learn control, they will consume you. She clenched her fists. And if I refuse? If I want no part of this? His gaze lifted to hers, steady, unyielding. Then you will be destroyed. And with you much more. But even as the days pressed down upon her, something unexpected grew. Kalen, the man she feared at first, became less a jailer and more something else. He walked beside her when nightmares woke her. He spoke of old tales, of times when he too had fought against the bond that tied him to the shadows, for he was not untouched by them. His own soul bore scars from battles fought long ago, battles that had left him neither man nor monster. But something caught between in his presence. Alara no longer felt entirely alone. One evening, as moonlight spilled like silver through the windows, she stood upon the balcony, the chill wind brushing against her skin. Kalen stepped beside her, silent for a long while. Finally, he said, "The shadows do not only destroy. They protect, they heal. They guard secrets too dangerous for the world to hold. What you carry is not only curse, it can also be gift." Her heart ached at his words. And what if I cannot bear it? He turned then, his hand hovering just above hers, not touching, but close enough to feel his warmth. Then I will bear it with you. Slowly, trust took root. Kalen began teaching her, not with harshness, but with patience. He showed her how to breathe when the shadows clawed at her thoughts, how to let them move through her without letting them rule her, how to call them when needed and dismiss them when they threatened to consume. At first, she stumbled. The shadows surged, wild and eager, and more than once she collapsed, trembling as though her very veins burned with fire. But Kalen was always there, his hand steady at her shoulder, his voice grounding her back to herself. Through failure came strength. Through strength came control, and with control came freedom, at least a taste of it. Yet nothing lasts without test. One night, a rift tore across the land, a wound of darkness that bled creatures of nightmare into the world. The villagers who once feared her were in danger. The world she had left behind now stood at the mercy of the very shadows she bore. Alara stood at the edge of choice. She could hide, retreat into the safety of the castle walls, pretend she was powerless. Or she could step forward, claim the mark that had marked her since birth, and face the darkness with the strength it had given her. Her hands shook. Fear pressed heavy in her chest. But when she looked to Kalen, she found his gaze steady upon her. Not commanding, not demanding, simply waiting. The choice was hers, and she chose. The night was alive with screams and fire. Shadows roared across the fields, creatures of smoke and fang tearing through all they found. But Alara stepped into the storm, her mark blazing with light darker than night itself. The shadows surged to her call, no longer wild, no longer untamed, but hers. They wrapped around her like armor, shield and blade all in one. Beside her, Kalen fought with a fury born of centuries, his blade cutting through nightmare with unyielding strength. Together they moved as though bound by a rhythm older than time, shadow and steel, light and dark. When the dawn finally broke, the land lay scarred but safe. The creatures had been driven back, the rift sealed, and Alara stood, weary but unbroken, her mark no longer burning with hunger but glowing with purpose. In the quiet that followed, Alara returned to the balcony where her journey had begun. The sun rose, soft and golden, painting the horizon with colors she had once thought lost to her. Kalen stood beside her, his presence steady as ever. "You are no longer marked by shadows alone," he said gently. "You are marked by your choice, by your courage." She turned to him, her heart full with something deeper than fear, deeper than pain. "Then let it be so," she whispered. "Let the shadows mark me, not as curse but as strength, as bond." And as the morning light touched her face, she felt it at last. She belonged, not to the village that had cast her aside, not to the mark that had haunted her, but to herself, and perhaps, just perhaps, to him.